Morality and ethics. Well, never let it be said that we shy away from the big questions on this show. But instead of getting into more precisely what is right and what is wrong, I'm going to be talking about this in very broad strokes. Namely, what I loosely refer to as the three different kinds of morality we usually run into in this world. Over in the West, we're mostly used to a kind of morality that's derived from the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, even Hindu side of things. This idea that God or goddess or it or whatever you refer to up above has somehow handed us this roadmap of what is right and what is wrong, what we should and shouldn't do. On the other hand, we have a somewhat more Eastern concept, and this we'll see a lot in more your Buddhism and your Taoism, which I call principle-based morality. And then, of course, we have learned morality. I'm going to try and get into all three of those just a little bit, and hopefully, as usual, come back to the middle at the end. Now, there's been a lot of argument and debate in the last, who knows how many years, as atheism has kind of been on the rise. And they aren't real fond of this law-based concept that the more religious people in our culture are used to. Oftentimes they hearken back to this Greek concept that is derived from the old philosophical statement which basically says, how can you take right and wrong from the gods? I mean, after all, look at the Greek gods. Zeus, for instance. How can you possibly take morality from a guy who goes around fornicating with women in the guise of swans and bulls? In whatever fashion that was done, I'm not quite sure. But it's a good question. And furthermore, isn't it kind of arbitrary? I mean, is what's good good because God says it's good? Or does God say it's good because it's good? This is one of the oldest questions we run into in philosophical thinking. And in order to try and get a handle on this idea, I'm going to flip things over just a little bit. For instance, instead of taking such a more anthropomorphized God of the Greeks, the more humanistic type gods, let's go over to an extremely unhumanistic version of the Christian God. Now, here I'm not talking about the old man with the beard, kneeling down, shaping man from the clay. I'm not talking about a deity that came into a universe already created and sort of shaped the world with his own hands and then put man into it. Instead, we're talking about a true creator God, a deity that literally created everything. Not only matter, but physics and psychology and emotions, actually created your wants and your hopes and your desires, and therefore all of potentiality. In other words, he created everything that you could do and everything that you will do. Well, when you look at it more from that perspective, what you actually have isn't an arbitrary God saying this is right and this is wrong. You have a creator saying, well, I know about this place. I know about it because I created it. And if you do this, this is the result. What you really have is a deity stating cause and effect. If you stub your toe, it's going to hurt. If you fall off a cliff, you're probably going to die. In fact, for a moment, let's look at these laws, these Judeo-Christian laws, which frankly are pretty much true across the board. Now, I'm not getting into all the 600 plus commandments that the Jews follow. I'm just talking about the basics, just the 10 Commandments. And I like the 10 Commandments because this is a type of morality that is very much across the board in the world. Almost every religion sticks to this type of thing. Do not steal. Don't kill people. Don't commit adultery. Don't bear false witness. Now, bearing false witness, keep in mind, doesn't just mean lying. It actually means getting up on the stand and lying about what someone did. And when you take a step back and you look at this type of morality, it all really has something in common. It all really just boils down to, don't be a douche. It's not really that complicated. When Jesus Christ was asked what is the most important of all of these laws, he said the first one, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy mind and all thy heart and all thy soul, and thy neighbor as thyself," which really just summed up all of them. All it really said was, treat people the way you'd want to be treated. If you screw people over, they're going to screw you back. Bad things will happen if you do bad things. It's not horribly complicated. Now, when you compare, for instance, your law-based morality to your principle-based morality, you do have something that's sort of flipped over. See, in law-based morality, you're going for this, what I call, 3-year-old concept. You see a kid about to touch a hot burner on a stove, and you grab him, and you say, "Don't do that, don't ever do that, don't ever touch that stove." Why? Because you're going to burn yourself. Now, that is a law. That is just, don't do this, don't ever do that. It's very flat. There's not a whole lot of flexibility there. But when it comes to 2-year-olds, that's kind of what you have to do, right? Because you can't go into long explanations over when they can and can't touch this stove. Now, the truth is, they can touch the stove. If it's off, there's no problem. But we can't explain that to them. So we do have these very broad 2-year-old rules. Now, there's also the principle concept. If we go over to the way the East does things, instead of giving you a law and sort of hoping you'll eventually find the principle, they give you a principle and assume that you'll apply the law. It really just happens in reverse. So in the more Eastern side of things, it's more trying to teach the child not to touch something hot, instead of specifically saying, don't touch a hot burner. And of course, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Now, we do have that third kind of morality. That morality that says, well, if your 2-year-old reaches up and touches that hot burner, he probably won't touch it again. Of course, we all know that's not always true. Some of us do touch it again. Some of us touch it 10 or 20 times because some of us take longer to learn than others. Now, to me, law-based morality does have a point where it sort of breaks down, just like principle morality does. See, principle morality says, give me the principle, give me the idea of not touching hot things. That's kind of tough with kids. And in a lot of ways, we're all kind of like kids. And if you say, don't touch hot things, it's not always easy for us to wrap our heads around that, which is why law-based morality works very quickly. It's instantaneous. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. It breaks down at the point where eventually you have to face that, well, the fact that principles really aren't that simplistic. You can't just say, don't do this and don't do this and don't do that. Eventually, you have to start reasoning it. Eventually, you have to break those rules down and figure out, why don't I do this? And why don't I not do that? And why do I do this? You have to reason that principle behind it. And of course, like I said, the opposite being true in the Eastern side of things. And then, of course, always coming back to learned morality. See, to me, the simplest guy on an island 50,000 miles away from civilization, who never sees a single soul in his life, he can figure out morality. I mean, because he can learn it. See, if you do something bad happens. We sort of figure that out. Now, it's kind of helpful if that person says, don't touch the stove, but we also will learn if we do touch the stove. So the truth is, there's really advantages and disadvantages to all of these things. And when the atheist says, well, can't I just figure it out for myself? Yes, you can figure it out for yourself. Of course you can. The law has it is good for those certain things. The law is good for just saying, hey, don't do that. It's pretty easy to just follow. And some people really do work best that way. Just tell me what to do and tell me what not to do, and I can just follow that. But there's always some of us that really, we prefer to learn. We prefer to experience life and figure out what not to do. And there's some real disadvantages to that. But frankly, it's just the way some of us work. So, in closing, I think that the best thing I can say is that all of these different types of morality come around to the same place. No matter what, you're going to figure out that if you hurt people, you're going to get hurt in return. It's not terribly complicated. But sometimes when you're comparing these belief systems, it can feel complicated. So what I'd like you to do is sometimes when you see things clashing, you see ideologies clashing, just try to take a bird's eye view and see that really we're all just learning in different ways. Once again, I'm the Urban Omnist.